Welcome. Hi,
Hi.
Joe, and hi, Joe. How exciting. Thank you so much for joining. As most people know, books are being banned like crazy. And Joe, I understand that this isn't something that's new for you. So if you could just like tell us a little bit about your experience and when is the first time that after you wrote a book, then you started it seeing being banned. I mean, it's just wild to me.
Yeah. Well, my very first book came out in 2007, and it was called Lessons from a Dead Girl, and it's about childhood sexual abuse. And that book has been challenged numerous times. In fact, it was on American Library Association's most challenged books list. But that was several years ago, and I kind of thought my banned days were over. I've been writing a lot more middle grade in the past few years, and it wasn't really on my radar anymore that I was considered like a controversial author. But in the past 2 years, I started getting, hits from people who were sharing these really huge lists of books getting challenged in places like Texas and Florida and Pennsylvania. And sure enough, several of my titles were showing up on these lists on books that I thought were, it's hard to sort of understand why some of my books are being challenged. But they're very, I think that a lot of times when people are challenging books, they are very careful with the language that they use to explain why they're being challenged, right? So, for example, I wrote down the quote because this is the kind of language that gets used. So, for example, Matt Krause, was a Republican, who came up with that initial enormous list. I can't remember how many, but it was in the hundreds of books that he were deemed inappropriate. The language that he used was any book that, quote, might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress. I mean, that's the definition of a good book, I think. But anyway, looking at the books that were challenged, See You at Harry's, which is a middle grade novel about childhood death. One of the characters in that book, the older brother, happens to be gay. I'm quite certain that is the reason that book has found its way on that list. The other book that got a lot of publicity early on because it was on those first lists that were getting so much publicity because everyone was kind of shocked in the beginning when this was happening is Pearl, which again, it's about a young single mom who was hiding her identity from her father because she was afraid he would kick her out of the house if he found out she was gay. And then after he dies, her daughter, who's now a teenager, discovers this secret. And it's about how they rekindle their friendship and develop trust again after her mom had kind of lied to her. So again, there's that LGBTQ theme in that book. And that's the only thing that I can think of that would be remotely controversial. It's about love and family and friendship. So it is difficult as an author when you're writing books like this that are specifically trying to cover stories about kids who don't always see themselves in books to suddenly now see them being yanked away. So when I saw somebody tweeted yesterday, we're going to talk to an author about what it feels like to have a book challenged. And I kept thinking, how does it feel? How do I feel? I just feel, I feel sad. I feel angry, yes, but I think mostly I feel so sorry for these kids that are, they're the ones that are not going to have access to books that really do change them for the better. As a kid growing up, I found myself in books in the same way. I felt, that there were certain things that nobody wants to talk about in my real life. And when I could find a book about a so-called controversial topic that I was either curious about or afraid about, or that made me feel, like that I was different, if I could find that in a book, I could help make sense of it, and now the books that do that for kids are being taken away. So that's a very long answer to your question, but that's sort of where I'm at right now with it, where I'm just like, I could be angry or I could have a sense of pride. Like when your friends find out that your book is banned, they're like, oh, it's a badge of honor. And it's like, I mean, maybe it feels that way a tiny bit, but mostly it just feels, like I said, it just feels sad, honestly.
And it's interesting because so much of what we talk about is how there's this messaging tactic where the people who are banning these books are saying that they're doing it in the interests of kids. Like you said, that quote, and I think he banned or put at least 850 books on that list, yours being among them, about the psychological distress, right? So the messaging that they're coming at it from is that the guise of protecting kids, when in fact the New York Times review of See You at Harry's, this is what it says. See You at Harry's offers, on the one hand, a deft and delicate handling of commonplace traumas, how to negotiate bullying on the school bus, what it means for everyone in a family when a teenager comes to terms with his sexuality, and on the other, the enormous and mercifully rare drama of a child's accidental death. And while the distinction between these narrative elements distinction between these narrative elements, their disparate weights, may seem to an adult huge, Knowles is aware that a child's perspective is somewhat different. So literally, what they're trying to say they're taking these books away from children because of is what your book is offering kids, a map, a pathway towards navigating distress. Just curious on your thoughts on that.
That's what most of the books on these lists are doing. Yeah, just to give you an anecdote that highlights just that, if I may. Last spring I was invited to Youngstown University. They have this children's it's a writing conference for kids in middle school and high school, and they invite a few authors to come, and you give talks about, you know, how you became a writer, and you talk about your books, etc. And then the kids have a chance to ask questions and come up to you afterwards and have you sign your book or whatever. It's an amazing experience. There's like 3,000 kids here, and it's really wonderful. And when what I do is I tell my story. I talk about why I write the books I write, and I talk about why I write the kind of characters that I write and include the kinds of characters I write. And so in my book, Where the Heart Is, the main character she's just turned 13. She's confused about her identity, and she's trying to figure it all out, right? And so I talked about to the audience, the kids, I talk about how my own experience as a kid having those confused feelings too, and why I write stories that I wish I had when I was a kid to help me navigate those times. And I gave 9 sessions over 3 days, so several groups of hundreds of kids over and over again, the same thing. And every single time in the signing line, there would be not 1, but 2, and sometimes 3 kids it would come up to, and you could see they were shaking, starting to get teary. And they would say things like, "You're the first person to talk about kids like me. You're the first person." And these are, let's repeat, these are kids in middle school and high school. And you know, once they say that, once they say it out loud, they just start crying. And you know, there were group hugs. This was like the first time I went anywhere without a face mask. I thought, well, COVID, that's it. It was been a good run. I'm definitely getting COVID. But it didn't matter, like just hugging all these kids and trying to help them feel heard and seen and less alone, and not like they don't belong. They belong in books just like everybody else. And so whenever I think about these moments where it's like, would you like to go do this live talk in front of strangers? It's like, no, I'm afraid. But then I think about those kids, and I think this is they're more important than my nervousness. They deserve us to be advocating for them. I'm sorry, I get emotional, but it's just crazy.
We're getting emotional too.
Here's a story in contrast to that, to like make us feel a little bit better. Not long after that, like maybe a month or 2, my tiny little town in Heartland, Vermont held its very first Pride parade. and it was between one church in our town to another church in our town, and a friend ran it, and she was saying, just please get anyone you can. I just want to show the kids that they're supported. And so we were expecting a very small group of people. And we got there, there were a bunch of middle school age kids, some high school kids. I mean, when I say a bunch, I live in a town with a population of 3,000. So there were like, 20 kids, maybe fewer, and a lot of adults. I mean, surprisingly, an amount of people came. Some I knew, some I didn't. And everyone was acting very quiet and nervous, especially the kids. They didn't all know each other. They'd showed up for this event. And we all had our flags and our brightly colored clothing, and we started putting rainbow tattoos on each other. And you could see they were surprised. They were surprised that all these adults were acting like goofy and fun and loving and just willing to do this thing. So we start out on this single file parade through town. And the whole way there, it's on our only main street. Cars started, they'd slow down and honk and beep and wave and say, I support you, we love you, and all this stuff. And by the time we got to the other church, which was like maybe a mile away, the kids that were there were doing cartwheels and handstands and laughing and screaming. And we had this little rally at the end, and they were, if I had had a camera where I could have videotaped what they were like in the beginning of that and at the end, they felt our town's love. And when I contrast that with these kids in Ohio who had never had that experience, there was nobody there beeping a horn at them and saying, we love you. And so that's the difference. And if you can't support them in a parade, you can certainly support them by recognizing them and giving them a book that you think might help them. And so, if you have, I don't know how many people are listening and what their availability is to go to these school board meetings, but if you can go there, even just your presence, you don't have to speak up, but just your presence there showing that you are one of the people that support good books and these kids, and you accept them and you love them. I do think that goes a very long way. I know we outnumber the people that are challenging these books. I know they are vastly outnumbered. They're just a very loud minority that has figured out how to infiltrate these things, and unfortunately given a lot of power to make these vast changes in these schools and libraries. And my heart just goes out to the teachers who are, and librarians who are risking their jobs to provide books to kids. It's shocking when you start to think about this is actually really happening. It feels like, some kind of dystopian movie or book, but it's really happening, and it's such a shame.
I'm very emotional right now because you really I was like really touched a nerve, because I was going to ask you, and among the many things, but you've already answered it. Really, I was going to ask you what you think the impact on children who might be identifying as LGBTQ or even on them, right? So that's important because you've explained a lot of that already. And I think as moms, like for Jill, I'm not speaking for Jill necessarily, but I think all moms can agree that we want our kids to feel seen and to feel heard and to feel validated in the myriad of things that they experience through their lives, and that they'll feel safe being who they are, their genuine selves. And there's this huge component of these children being seen and the power of that. But there's this other side of it too that's so important, which is the children who maybe don't identify in those ways, being able to see children who aren't maybe like them, in a light that doesn't other them or make them scary. And I think that's, I wonder if you just touch on that a little bit too.
Absolutely, we all need to be allies, and I think books show kids how to do that. I mean, if you're in a community that is trying to keep this somehow a secret, which is ridiculous, at least books show, like books build empathy. We all know that, right? That's why we read. We read to have experiences that are different than ours. And what safer place to do that than in a book? So the fact that we're saying these books aren't safe is, again, one of those ridiculous things. But yes, I mean, I get letters from kids who tell me, I have a gay friend and I had no idea what it must be like for them. And I feel so bad that I haven't been more supportive, and I'm going to try really hard now. What more can we ask for? You know?
Right.
It's not to say that I write books to teach lessons,
right.
but I write books that reflect reality, and that's a natural thing that comes out of that when you write about real stuff. So yes, I mean, I think these are just as valuable to all kids, and you know, it's not obviously there are other books that are being banned about history, for example, and the Black experience. And again, like saying that it's upsetting to read about the past, I mean, it's just insane to use that as an excuse, right? And so we're talking about so many children being affected in different ways by these challenges, and by seeing their existence being literally taken off shelves, and saying, we don't want anyone to know about you. We don't want anyone to know about your heritage or your experience. It's criminal. I mean, I don't know how else to word it. I'm not quite sure where to go next, other than, as I said, showing up, speaking out. It always feels very uncomfortable to speak out, because there are so many, you've probably experienced this because you have these wonderful podcasts all the time, trolls coming and saying horrible stuff to you, trying to make you feel bad about what you do. So you know that every time you're doing this, you are sort of putting yourself out there to be criticized or threatened in some way. And, you know, the other thing I really want to emphasize, this sort of myth that when you have a book challenge, you know, your book sales go up and it's like this wonderful thing. That's really, I mean, unless you're a New York Times bestseller, really the opposite happens, especially when you write for kids, because school libraries and classroom libraries, those are for most kids, that is the only access to books they have. They can't go to the bookstore and buy books, right? Or so once you take away access, that book is now gone. My book Pearl is now out of print. So I just want to stress, and I'll be okay. But I know that there are a lot of authors who are struggling far more than I am with these challenges. And so just letting people know that another way that you can support authors is by, you know, getting their books into kids' hands in other ways if they can't afford it themselves, which is, you know, most kids cannot do that. So just to emphasize that it really is not this wonderful thing to have your book banned for a myriad of reasons, but that's another one of them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think there's that misconception of like, it's almost, it can be an honor or something like that, but I'm like, this is your livelihood. Like, this is what you do for a living. And if these are taken away, and then I can tell that you are passionate about telling these stories so children can see themselves. And I'm a mom of a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I just so appreciate what you're doing with your work. And I think as parents, you know, we want to kind of protect our kids, but that's not reality. Like, we're human beings living in reality. So you can't hide these things from people. And if you talk about it honestly, it can help kids and even adults feel like they're not alone and they're not like weird or different because they're experiencing these things. So it's hard for me to understand why people want to keep this away from kids. I don't personally get it.
Yeah. I mean, what it would be so much easier to talk about a story that was from a book than real life. If you're like, well, let's talk about the plot of this story as a way to open the door to talk about what's going on with you. How are you similar? How are you different? I mean, there are so many ways of using books as a bridge in your own relationship with your child to talk about tough things. And again, like, wouldn't you rather your child first experience something difficult, like in See You at Harry's when there's a character dies in that book? I would far rather have my child first experience death in a book than in real life. Tragedy happens. We cannot predict when something terrible is going to happen in our lives. And we can't protect our kids from it. There's no matter where you live, how wealthy you are, you cannot protect your child from everything. But one way you can prepare them is by sharing lots of stories with them and talking about them. I mean, when I was a child, and I read books that made me cry, I mean, sob, like Bridge to Terabithia or Beat the Turtle Drum or any of those books, you know, someone would think, oh my gosh, that child is devastated. Who gave her that book? Why would they give her that book? It prepared me. I experienced horrible trauma as a child. And if I hadn't known those stories, I think it would have been come out of nowhere that I had no idea that it was even a possibility, a realm of possibility that bad things happen. But books helped me. It's not like they can make it better, but they do give you a somewhat of a better understanding that this is what life is like for other people. And again, if we're talking about empathy, if you read a book about a child death, for example, and then a child's friend of a friend experiences it, they'll be able to better comfort their friend, knowing what their friend might be going through. So again, you know, books are knowledge. Knowledge is power. And I try to think about, you know, why are these people doing this really? Why are they really trying to keep knowledge from children and young adults? And I think that knowledge is power thing is a big piece of it. And, you know, I was talking to my husband about this because I thought I don't want to vilify all of these people. I need to try to understand where they're coming from. And if as a writer, if they were characters in a book, the villains, they're not. I mean, sometimes it feels that way for sure. I would start to think, okay, well, what drives them? What is the character motivation here? And when I think about my characters who are the bad guys in my books, I try to understand them, right? And I think usually what it comes down to is the thing that's making them do the things that they do comes from a place of fear. And so once you can acknowledge that, then understanding where does that fear come from? And I think in this case, a lot of these parents' fear is based on lies and ignorance. I don't say that as a way to insult. I mean, I think that they really are ignorant about a lot of things. And they're terrified. And this is the only way they think they're protecting children somehow. And that's what makes it even more of a tragedy, right? Because they're hurting them so much more. What's going to happen to these kids who are being denied an education of real history when they go to college outside of Florida, hopefully? Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Or somewhere, like anywhere else, you start to learn the real truth about American history. Are they going to be like, oh, my mom was so sweet to lie to me all my life? I don't know. No. Like, it just, why are we doing this? There are age-appropriate ways to teach history. And sharing stories, books, historical fiction is one of the best ways because it puts everything into context. It makes the characters feel real. It shows what it was really like to experience these things. So, you know, it's, if I can try to figure out the solution, it's got to be somehow to unlock this fear that these people are having and show them that this is not the approach to take to solve that problem that they're having.
It's interesting because you're looking at this from the perspective of inclusivity and realizing that not all people are all bad or all good, that there is so many shades of gray, you know, in the middle of that spectrum. And something Jill and I talk about a lot is that there is a lot of murkiness on some of these subjects. There's, admittedly, I don't know a lot about, you know, gender affirming care, things like that. And there's a whole wide range of things that people don't know enough about right now that are sort of being boogeymaned and used as like ways to weaponize content so that we have a less sort of inclusive, you know, society. And there's a lot of power in fear, unfortunately. And right. And so that is a successful tool, is to make parents afraid of these boogeymen that they don't know enough about. But the way to really battle those boogeymen is to educate and illuminate and tell stories and introduce subjects, because the real world is more reflected in books and things like what you're doing than it is in these narratives that they're trying to weave and in denying accurate history. So it's just like what you're doing. It's amazing to me because you're such an inspiration, because you're really trying to see why are they doing this? Because it doesn't seem to make sense for a society that would want their children to be best prepared for the future. So I wanted to applaud you on having like such an open-minded and fair view while your content is under attack. And it's interesting because this could be one way that we could go back and fight this fight, is by trying to get to the bottom of what is motivating other people. And then, because I think there are people in the middle here who are being misled and being lied to, like you said, and they need to see stories that are more accurate and more reflective of the truth than your books are pornography, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we can tell stories in books like yours.
I know, and I think, you know, Joe, what I like appreciate about writers is that, and you keep talking about empathy, and I think one way to have empathy and to teach empathy is to stay curious, is to be curious about the world. And that's what you're doing in your storytelling, is you're telling these different stories and reaching these young adults or the middle school age kids, so they can be, because they're naturally curious. We're all curious. And so just kind of feeding into that curiosity. And so I have a specific question for you, because I have an avid reader in my family. She's 13 years old. She's in 8th grade. And she loves, and like, she's got a huge bookshelf in her room. And I've told her, I'm like, it's so sad because half of the books on your shelf have been banned somewhere. And she's like, I don't get it. And I'm like, I don't understand either. I can't even explain it to you. But I'm curious if, so she's 8th grade, 13 years old. So what book of yours would you recommend for someone at that age?
That I wrote, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, all of them. No, I'm kidding.
All of them. Yes, of course.
I think Where the Heart Is would be really appropriate for that age, actually. I don't know if that one has been banned yet. Now, like, I think it's so under the radar. So now it's like, oh no.
Oh no.
So if it's one that has been banned, then I would say See You at Harry's would be a good choice.
Yeah. Thank you. And what really I'm assuming that you're not going to stop. Like you said, the first time you found one of your titles on a banned book list was 2017. So what really motivates you, and what are you looking to write about in the future?
Well, I think that kids motivate me, going to these events and hearing what they're interested in and worried about and care about. All I have to do is think about that, all those kids that were at that conference, who so needed to hear an adult say the things that I had just said. That to me motivates me to continue writing, trying to write. So yes, and I'm writing a book right now, and the title is called Someone's Gonna End Up Crying. So yeah.
That could be the story of my life.
So So, and it's about, you know, it's about a real kid dealing with a dad who's checking out, and how she copes with that. So I'm still trying to write stories that I think are lived experiences by today's kids, and that's what I'm just going to keep doing that, you know, and I will, as nervous as I get, I will still continue to try to speak out for these kids, because if it ends my career, I'll be okay. I would rather do what I can to just be an ally for the people who have become voiceless, essentially, because of this. That's far more important to me than my career. So, and I realize that it comes from a place of privilege that my husband can somehow support me. But yeah, I won't give up. But I'll just keep thinking of the kids. That's really, I guess that's what I would leave it on, is, yeah.
I know.
I love that. I love that. And I love what you were saying before about, you know, people speaking up if they can, and how scary that can be. And there's a whole spectrum. Alexa, stop. My Alexa wants to remind me to do something that I can't resist. Alexa, not now. Alexa, stop. She's always, I can't function without her, which is so sad. But like you were talking about the spectrum of people who, and how you can get involved, and how you can use your voice, and how you can advocate, because every one of us wants every kid to want to feel like they want a cartwheel, right? Like that's what we all want. I think no matter what your politics, we can all agree on that. And so how do we get there? And there's lots of ways we can get there. You know, I personally been touched by a book being removed. The Becky Albertalli, The Upside of Being Requited, was removed from the middle school in a town 2 towns over from me. And we've been talking about that at Red, White, and Blue. And I've spoken to moms and women from all over the spectrum who've gotten involved in ways that they were comfortable with, and used their voice to advocate in a way that they were comfortable. But we all can. We can all get those kids to want a cartwheel. We can do it on every level, whether it's, you know, writing the books and putting yourself out there in this way, or going and speaking at the board meetings where these books are being questioned or banned, or just being there, showing up. You know, there's a whole wide gamut of things we can do to keep drawing attention to this.
Absolutely. And I want to end with another way that we can do is buy the books. So buy Jo's books. So I have a question for you. Do you have a favorite independent bookstore that you would recommend? Because I'm definitely going to be buying a couple for my daughter. So.
Yes, thank you so much. The Yankee Bookshop in Woodstock, Vermont. If you Google them, they have a website. I also have a link to their store on my website, which is knowles.com. And if you order through there, if you put in the comments that you want me to sign it, you can say who for, and I'll go. They're 2 miles down the road. I drive down and I'll sign it for you and individualize it for whoever special kid you want it to do it for. I'm very happy to do that, and then they'll ship it to you. So.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I love that. I will absolutely do that. Okay. And both Joes, do either one of you have anything you want to add before we conclude?
I just wanted to say, like, I'm so glad that we got to talk to you. I'm so sad that it's under these circumstances, because that this is where we are. And, you know, publishers will tell us that they have a really deep bench of banned books and banned authors. And it's kind of mind blowing that we're here. But after talking to you, I personally just feel so buoyed by all of the things that you're doing and the things that you've said, and your commitment and passion to make these kids cartwheel. I can't get that out of my mind. And so I just feel like I just wanted to thank you. And I also want to make sure that we all realize that while we may not think this impacts us directly, because it might not be happening in our backyards, it could be coming. And so, like, we all have to be vigilant and paying attention. And we all have so much in common when it comes to wanting to protect our kids, truly. So that's all I wanted to add at the end of it.
I mean, just to add to that, you're right. Like, a lot of us think, oh, it's not happening in my community, but honestly, it doesn't matter, because if it's happening anywhere, it's happening. It is affecting us. We are a country, and everything. We are all connected in some way. And so, if there's anybody here that is hurting, then we are all connected to that hurt. And if we are helping, even in our smallest way, then we are connecting to that help. And I think that's sort of the side that we should all strive to be on, is even if we're just coming to an Instagram live thing to show that we're present, that makes a difference. I can feel it, you know, I can feel supported. And if I can feel that and it feels good, imagine being an insecure kid and what it feels like for them to feel supported. So every little bit helps, but I don't think any bit is little, I guess. So I'll end on that.
I love that. Every little bit helps, but I don't think any bit is little. Oh my gosh. It's almost like you're a writer. Like you're good with words. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
You might want to look into that.
So much.
I don't like Joe's tear. I was tearing up earlier. I'm like, cry fest. Thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate your work and we are absolutely cheering you on. So
thank you so much. Thanks. And power to all my other authors going through this.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you everybody for joining. And then definitely check us out at redwine.blue. That's our website. So we have lots of training. We even have a campaign called Book Ban Busters. And sometimes we have trainings about how you can stand up for book banning and different things like that. So definitely check that out. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Have a great afternoon and we'll see you next time.